Language expressed during this episode may be deemed offensive. Viewer discretion is advised. And we are back with Through Black Eyes Unfiltered, Part 2 of the Civil Rights Movement in Florida. I am still here with Doctors Marvin and Raymond Dunn, brothers. We have a new guest who's joining us, Mrs. Delores Hills. She will be speaking with us a little bit later, along with Miss Carolyn Reed, when we get to a subject called the Tallahassee sit-ins. Correct, Dr. Raymond?
You're correct.
So we will get underway. I would like to take a moment just to allow you guys to introduce yourselves a little bit, because this is our final episode. We're going to be wrapping up, so let's recap who you guys are.
All right, I'm Marvin Dunn. I am a native of Florida. My family moved to Miami in 1951. And I am a retired professor of psychology from Florida International University and author of a number of books on Black Florida and Black Miami history.
And I am Raymond Dunn, and of course, if his family moved to Miami, I moved to Miami also because we are brothers. I served as the dean of students at two different colleges over a period of 25 years or so. I am also a professor at a community college, as well as an adjunct professor at Nova Southeastern University, and author of a children's storybook.
I am Delores Davis Hills, a native Miamian. I was born here in what you call Overtown. See, I finished Booker T. Washington, Florida A&M University, taught in the system for 30 years, and retired. Presently, I am the regional director for the National Sorority Phi Delta Kappa Incorporated, which was the first African-American professional teachers organization. And it is a pleasure to be here.
And it is a pleasure to have all of you here.
Thank
now,
you.
we just came off of talking about Harry T. Moore in part 1 of the Civil Rights Movement. So we're going to continue the conversation. And I'd like to move over into some historical background on the beginning of the modern Civil Rights Movement in Miami in 1946. So we're going to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's a mistaken view that the Civil Rights Movement started in North Carolina when some black students held some lunch counter demonstrations, but that's not true. The Civil Rights Movement in this country, the modern Civil Rights Movement in this country, started in Miami when some black people protested the fact that there was not a, quote, colored, unquote, beach in Miami. And just to recap that, because it did lead to the establishment of Virginia Key Beach in Miami. During the Second World War, a number of military bases were opened up in Miami for training soldiers and sailors because of the weather being conducive to training. And the Navy had to train sailors to swim. And Dade County was not Miami-Dade County at the time. Dade County allowed the Navy to bring white sailors over to Crandon Park, which is a county beach, to be trained to swim. But they refused to allow the Navy to send colored sailors to Crandon Park because of segregation. So the county allowed the Navy to use a little piece of land called Virginia Key to train colored sailors, as they were called at the time, to swim. When the war was over, the Navy turned the beach back over to the county. And at that time, some black ministers and others approached the county and said, well, don't do that. We would like to have that be a colored beach. They were not asking to integrate the white beach. They were asking for a beach for colored people, black people, to be established by the county. And the county said, no, we're not going to do that. And within a few weeks of the county saying no, Father Theodore Gibson Ray tells me Garth Reeves, who was a
Yes.
black newspaper publisher, and some others, went up to a white county beach called Hallover Beach in North Dade County and did a wade-in. This is 1946.
A wade in.
Waded in to the white beach, scared the white folks to death.
And what's a wade in? I'm
They
sorry.
a planned demonstration to go into the water to
Just
make a
go
point.
in there.
Just go in the water.
Wade
You're
in.
not necessarily going out there to swim and do backflip. You're just going to prove
Exactly.
that you will go in there.
I think they were in fact dressed.
Yeah,
when they
just
went in.
wade in.
Waded
They
in.
just waited.
They went in. And within a week or so of the Hallover Beach wade-in, Dade County said, "Oh yes, we think we can have a beach for colored folks," and that's how Virginia Key Beach was established for blacks. And as we got here in 1951, that's where we went to the beach. Now you grew up here, Delores, so you know the story, right? That's where you went to the beach too, right? In the 50s,
Yeah, we went to the beach. Happy to go.
happy to have a place to go. Now we didn't realize that was a Dade County sewage treatment plant
We didn't.
right around the corner
Right around
of
the
Virginia Key. So we're out there swimming in what we thought was nice, clean salt water.
Don't tell that part of the story.
Well, I think we need to tell that part of the story. Yes, tell
Well,
it.
Okay.
Well, it's just that was a part of county property where one of the sewage treatment facilities was constructed around the corner from where the black folks were allowed to swim, and we didn't really know that. And I guess it just was not a matter of public discussion at the time. But I do remember that when we would go out there on the weekends, they would have state troopers with their cars parked on that bridge that goes over to Crandon Park. So if you were a black person to go to Crandon Park on a weekend, you had to have a reason to go across that bridge. You worked for somebody over there, you had a job over there, then they would let you go. But I can not forget the fact that there were these state police cars parked there to keep black people from going over to that beach.
Do you still have Mom's ID card?
Well, our mother had an ID card to work on Miami Beach as a maid, issued by the Miami Beach Police Department. Because if you were a black person on Miami Beach in the 1940s and 50s, you had to be there because you had a job. And you had to be off that beach by sundown.
Wasn't the policy no blacks and no Jews after sundown?
What?
Well, I don't know about the Jews part.
Well, they heard that.
No, they didn't chase the Jews off the beach.
No, they couldn't chase them up because the Jews later bought it.
Well,
No.
they want to the blacks. In fact, every town in Florida that has the name beach in it, Vero Beach, every town that has the
Walton
name
Beach.
beach had a sundown law, which black people are ruled, not a law, but an expectation, a standard that black people could not be on the beach after a certain hours. The police in those days had a tremendous amount of power. I had people that I interviewed who told me that back in the 20s and 30s, if you were a black man sitting on your porch in Overtown on a Monday morning at 8 or 9 o'clock, the police would ask you, "What are you doing here? Where do you work, boy?" Because they were suspicious of a black person who did not appear to have a job. They figured you were some sort of a flim-flam man or a gangster, whatever. So, and I didn't hear the part about a white cop being able to walk into your house, but it does not surprise me because police had almost unlimited power in those days.
They did.
Now, you was having fun in the sun and the water back then, right? But can you give me a little bit of historical perspective on some of the key players for Virginia Beach?
Sure. You want to start with Reverend Theodore Gibson.
Tell us a little bit about him.
Reverend Theodore Gibson was an Episcopal minister. Is that right, Marvin?
That's correct.
Rector.
Yeah.
Christ Episcopal Church. But
And he was also president of this local chapter of the NAACP
That's
for many
correct.
years. Yeah. And he was a mover and a shaker. But one of the major things that he did, amongst numerous other things, was helping to integrate the beaches. And Marvin just spoke about that one. That's what I remember him most.
Well, not just the beaches.
about.
He was the first one to lead the effort to sit in the front of the bus. The photographs of Father Gibson and 2 or 3 other people sitting right behind the white bus driver to force that issue. He was also involved in forcing the city to desegregate golf courses. So he was
Right.
across the...
That's what I
Yeah, he and Garth Reeves, publisher, owner, editor of the Miami Times, played golf back in those days. And the Springs Country Club was, of course, all white, but they allowed blacks to play on Mondays. Only time black golfers could play, Miami Springs Country Club, Mondays. And Father Gibson and Garth Reeves decided that that was wrong. And so...
But do you know why it was on Mondays only?
Why?
That was the day they watered the grass.
Okay.
They watered the grass on Mondays, and blacks could come out on Mondays. And
Now, blacks caddied every day. Caddy meaning carrying the golf clubs with the whites. But anyway, Father Gibson was also a part of that. He also was instrumental, if not led many sit-in demonstrations with the lunch counters and things here in Miami-Dade County. So he was all over the place. You have to ask yourself, how did he have time to run his church? He was
a Bahamian, too. And I'll tell you something about Father Gibson. Father Gibson will put you in your place. He became the second black person to serve on the Miami City Commission. And I can remember he's passed on now, going to commission meetings, and Father Gibson was concerned that blacks were getting their fair share. He and Mrs. M. Nathalie Range, who was the first black person to sit on the Miami City Commission, had that as their agenda. How is this law or this budget going to affect black people? And Father Gibson, he was a minister. He would cuss you out.
That's what I was going to tell him. I was trying not to say that.
You can say it. Be real. This is unfiltered. Get real. Us young people need to hear it.
He would cuss out the police chief. So that took courage. And what Mrs. Range did took courage. You know how she became active, Mrs. Range, in the Civil Rights Movement? Liberty City Elementary School was where the colored kids went. If you live in Opelika, before they put schools up in Opelika, Bunch Park Elementary and North Dade, before those schools were built in the late 50s and 60s, black children had to be bused down to Liberty City. And we were bused down to Liberty City Elementary School. Mrs. Range had sons going to Patrick Range, going to Liberty City Elementary School. And that school was so crowded that they had portables, these wooden portables.
I used to teach in one of them.
And they didn't have their own cafeteria. And they would bring the food from the white school. That's right. So she became active as the head of the PTA over the issue of the kinds of educational facilities that were being denied to black children. Then she became concerned about other wider issues. For example, the city of Miami didn't pick up the garbage in the black community except once every other week, but they had a different level of service for white folks. And Mrs. Range, what really got her attention outside of Liberty City was she got a lot of black people to put their garbage in garbage bags, and she had them take them to the city commission meeting and put them right up in front of the Diaz to convince the city to stop picking up. And they started picking up trash in the black communities on a regular basis after she did that.
That was so daring.
Wasn't it?
Wow.
And for a woman,
otherwise,
too.
they might have shot him.
Indeed. You know, it hit me that a lot of the early black leaders in Miami were Bahamians. Our folks we were African Americans from Georgia, but a lot of the folks who really would not take crap were from the Bahamas.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, that's
a work ethic.
They migrated
here
from
because
there.
of Flag Road.
Is there a work ethic in Bahamian culture that's different in the United States?
That's a very good question. The Bahamian came from a culture where England had ended slavery long before it ended here. So these Bahamians coming into Miami would tell you in a minute, we don't put up with that. Our people don't put up with that. They would tell you in a minute, I'm a subject of the British Crown. And you niggas, y'all came from Mississippi and Georgia, but we just don't put up with that stuff. And so they didn't. The first race riot we had in Miami was in the Black Coconut Grove area because Bahamian men believed that a black minister had been beaten and killed by the Klan. So they were very, very resistant, much more so.
Tell me about Virgil Hawkins, John Dew, and Patricia Stevens Dew. Tell me a little bit about them and how they paved the way for generations like me.
Can I talk about Stevens?
Sure. I was going to
talk about Virgil Hawkins came first.
Okay.
Virgil Hawkins.
We'll be brief. He was the first black person to apply to attend law school at the University of Florida and was denied admission because of his race. And he persisted in suing the state of Florida, went into the federal system even to sue his right to attend the University of Florida. Eventually was forced, the state was forced to allow him to attend the University of Florida. He didn't graduate, but he was the first one to get in. And he is a civil rights martyr in the sense that he alone persisted in his right to get an education.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were 5 of them initially, 5 blacks who set out to do that. The others dropped out, but he persisted over 50 years.
Another long...
Over a 50-year struggle. He was the only one left, still alive, still fighting.
And they kept saying he wasn't qualified. Even when the federal government said, you have to admit him, the response from the state was, well, but he doesn't meet our qualifications. And that's what took him so long to fight. I think now they have a building on the campus named after Virgil Hawkins. So somehow these
they always
black
name
martyrs, they
something
name
after
after
you.
you die.
Killed you, you did. Now you get something named after you.
Turn a Gifford Knight.
Yeah, so now tell me about
The Stevens?
the dues. Yeah.
Okay, John Dew, Pat Stevens.
Pat
would
Pat
you like to?
Stevens and her sister were at Florida A&M with us.
Okay.
With
And-
us.
Yes,
I
with
was
us.
there.
And,
We were there together.
we made a decision to go to the Leon Theater. So we lined up in the Leon Theater, old grooves, I was right. We're going to buy tickets. Where the theater was constructed, upstairs, the balcony area was for blacks, which held maybe 40 people. The rest of it was for everybody else. So we lined up, and when they looked up and saw nothing but a line of us, they decided they're not going to sell any tickets. So we still stood there with our little monies. Called the police. Police came with the bullhorn and said, disperse. We didn't move. About 15 minutes later, must be every van in the Leon County Police Department surrounded the area. So they proceeded to put us in the vans. We're going in like this. We don't want to get our heads hit.
Yeah.
They took us all down to the city jail. Now, they were sweating. They didn't know what to do. So they said, well, we don't have enough room for them. So they took the boys to the fairgrounds, which stayed open year round. They put the women in the city jail for safekeeping. I remember sitting on a little stool. They punch a button and bars come up. So now you're sitting on a stool with the bars like this. And Steven said to me, D, I said, yeah, get his number. So I was looking at this big policeman. I said, I have his number. I went to calling off the numbers. The man did this, click. Now I'm in this cell. I can't move. I never knew the barrel of a gun was so large. And I knew that if I made a move, he just might pull that trigger. I knew I was going to be dead. So I eased back like this, and I just stared him in his eyes. And what I saw was fear, because I'm thinking, we're in jail. We're in a cell. Why would he pull a gun on? I'm a woman. I'm a young woman. These guys are scared of us. Stevens was instrumental in keeping us all together. We were in a cell built for maybe 15, 20 people. 95 of us in there.
20-man cells, that's what they were.
And we had these little picnic benches, picnics, the tables. I'm sitting on the top, somebody sitting behind me, somebody sitting behind us. Got cold, they threw us some blankets. Gave us the blankets, we covered it. We singing, we shall overcome. We started singing and preaching. But those people kept us there. Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Wow.
Sunday, the school brought us food.
This whole started out talking about Pat, but Patricia Dew
And Pat was instrumental.
just to say who she was.
Yes,
she was
please.
from Quincy, Florida. She was the student leader of the civil rights movement in Tallahassee. She's now passed on. She married John Dew.
Okay, that's
who
how
she
I was going to
acted-
ask that question.
who was joined her also as a leader of the movement. They eventually moved to Miami and lived here for many, many years, and then moved back to Quincy where she passed on.
She had a daughter that was also a writer here.
That's correct.
Miami Herald.
Tanner Reeves did.
And she,
And
Reeves
how?
too.
And so, just going back a little bit, how were those two instrumental in paving the way for us,
John and Patricia Dew?
Yes.
Because they were the ones
for
out
young
there.
people today, for our generation? What did they do?
They led the movement. They led the
They
demonstrations.
led the civil rights movement
They were in Tallahassee.
in Tallahassee.
Their efforts were in Tallahassee. They moved to
Okay.
Miami somewhat later on after they.
Now she came to Miami prior to her involvement in that demonstration. She came to Miami. She and two other young ladies, I believe, to a core workshop.
Yeah, core and
Congress of
Racial equality.
Right.
That's where she got her training and background. She came down here and went to a core workshop. She went back to Tallahassee, and she and her friend decided, let's try it. And they started, not with the demonstrations that we were involved in, but they started with a couple of sit-in demonstrations.
Okay.
They had four students sitting in at Woolworth, and then they did a week later. They had 11. That kind of gave her legs, her sea legs, and she took it from there.
Well, the Tallahassee sit-ins is where we're going next with this conversation, and our guest is that we're going to call on the phone is Miss Carolyn Reed. So I'm going to give her a call now so she can join the conversation.
Okay.
My roommate.
Hello.
Hello there, Miss Carolyn Reed. How are you?
Absolutely excellent.
Wonderful. I love her. Every time I call her, she has a joyful voice. Well, we have called you because we're now ready to talk about the civil rights movement in Tallahassee, Florida. But before we get started, could you just introduce yourself to our guest and give us a little bit of background about yourself before we start asking questions?
Well, my name is Carolyn Reed Abrams, and I'm just me. I don't know what I can tell you about me other than I love life and I embrace it, and I've had a wonderful life, and I'm willing to share what I have learned through my travels with anyone who's willing to listen.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Let's introduce Carol a little clearer than that, because she's just not Miss Carol Reed out there. Carol Reed's father, Jimmy Reed, and maybe she'll tell you a little bit more about that, was the first and I think only black police officer in the community in Miami-Dade County where our family was raised, a community called Bunch Park. And so Carolyn and my brothers and I go back years and years to our childhood. So this is not a stranger on the phone.
And why don't you, if this is Marvin Dunn talking at the moment, Carol, could you just give us a little bit of background about yourself, where you grew up, and then we particularly would like to hear from you in as much as detail as you can recall exactly what your role was in the demonstrations in Tallahassee. Delores has given her experience. She may add some more things to it, and Ray's going to give his. I was not there, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself and just what happened in terms of your own personal experience in Tallahassee?
Okay. I grew up in Opelika, Florida, graduated from North Dade High School, and went on to Florida A&M. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and my father was definitely a policeman, a man of many trades there. But I want to clarify one thing. He was not the only black. That was Mr. Ross and Mr. Martin. There were 2 other black policemen there in Opelika. And my father was one of them. And I went on to have a career with the federal government and the Army, and my most prized part of my life was being a wife of my husband, Arthur Abrams. And when I was at Florida A&M, being a type of child that would not conform very easily to the standards, when the civil rights movement moved onto campus, I was certainly right in the forefront of going out and marching. It was my pleasure to do that. I went there, I was in Selma, and I went to Alabama. But those were the places that I participated in. But the most memorable one and the most joyful time was when we were at Florida A&M.
What happened at that time that you did?
Very entertaining when we were there.
Tell us about your part in that. How did you get involved in that exactly? Who got you involved?
Well, my roommate, who was at the time, was Doris Rutledge, and she was very activist. And we were in high school together and moved to Tallahassee together and became roommates at Florida A&M. And she encouraged me to come go out with her to a meeting, a couple of meetings, and I got involved with it. And it was just something that moved my heart for me to demonstrate and to be a part of this movement, which I knew was going to change the way the whole world saw blacks.
So what did you do exactly?
Well, we got together and we marched. We went on a march to integrate, actually, down at McCory's. We went to McCory's 5 and Dime store down there. And we went down to integrate the theater down at Tallahassee. But my incident for me at McCory's was that we had a Judge Rudd that when we were arrested, what my charge was for me was that I was supposed to be shoplifting, and I wasn't. And that, of course, led to a whole lot of things that my parents got involved with. But
they had all kinds of stuff on us.
Go ahead. We were just in shock that you were charged with shoplifting. I had not heard that that's how they processed.
Yeah, it was. It was later charged with shoplifting, but that was changed when my father got involved, and that it didn't faze me at the time because as being a youngster, 18 years old, it didn't bother me about them charging me for shoplifting. I was just very happy to be a part of that movement.
So were you ever arrested beyond that?
Certainly.
Yes,
I was. I was arrested, and with all of the girls, and we were separated from the boys, and we were put in jail. And I was one of the last ones to be released. As I was sharing with G, I was one of the last ones to be released with that group. And I too remember staying in jail, and they were feeding us something called tripe. And I thought they were talking about trout.
No, tripe is. Oh, tell the folks who don't know what tripe is.
What is tripe?
Oh my!
The young people need to hear that.
It is actually the stomach of a cow.
It's the intestines.
And they would fry it. And I just thought it was fish. I thought they were talking about fish at first. And I had a big appetite, so I was very hungry.
I told you.
But I found out what it was, and I couldn't eat that. But I really loved the grits. Whoever was cooking him was a black lady that brought me extra grits while I was in jail. I remember that very clearly. I was a big eater.
Carol, how long did you ladies, you young ladies, spend in jail? How many days were you all locked up?
For me, I remember that it was quite a few days. I don't have the same memory that Dee had in it because we were separated. But I know that I was one of the last ones to get out of jail because I had to walk back up to the hill. And I didn't go back on the bus.
How long were you in there, Dee?
We were in jail from Thursday to to Tuesday.
Thursday, Tuesday.
They sent a bus for us. No, they told us Monday, you will go see Judge Rudd, the same Judge Rudd, Carol. And we went to court to see Judge Rudd. We stand up for Judge Rudd when he walked in. And the judge said to us,
how many of you were there at this point?
Most of the women that was in the cell with me. So we're talking about 60, 65 at least. And he said to us, Negroes, y'all done let somebody fool y'all into breaking the law in the great city of Tallahassee, Leon County. And we're looking at each other saying, we got new names now. Negroes, we had never been called that. We been called everything but that. Anyway, he said, I'm going to let you go. But guess what? If you ever break a law in the great city of Tallahassee, Leon County, even spit on the sidewalks, you're going to serve 30 days. You hear me? And he told the bailiff, get him out of here. So we didn't know. We just standing up there and said, this way. Walked out, got on the bus. Stopped raising sand on the bus. Somebody shook the bus doors. It was President Gore. He got up there of the university. So he said, babies, children, listen to me. Shut up. We all looking at him. Why should we hush? We're thinking. He said the NAACP just paid $1 million bond to get you all out of here. If these people think that you're raising all this sand and causing a ruckus down here and they put you back in there, We don't know when you're going to get out. So act like you're supposed to until you get on the campus.
Here's my part of that story. I was sitting in the lunchroom that afternoon, me and my good friend eating lunch.
What year?
Yes,
1963, I think it was.
Okay.
63, 64, something like that. I graduated 65, so it had to be like 63, 64. We were sitting in the Florida A&M lunchroom, and we see all this commotion across the street, people lining up and all this stuff. And one of my friends, Henry Knight, came over and said, "Ray, you're going to join us again today?" And I said, "Sure, what's going on?" Well, prior to that, Henry from Fort Lauderdale had asked me to join he and 4 or 5 other guys in a sit-in demonstration for a lunch counter, which I did. And we went downtown, and it wasn't that big a deal. We went downtown, we sat there, the people got upset with us, and they told us that we don't serve niggers. We said we don't eat niggers, and they called the police and asked the police to come, and they came and made us leave. Now, this particular evening for the Civil Rights March for the theaters, we're sitting there eating lunch, and Henry Knight came over again. "Ray, you going to join us?" I said, "Sure." So me and my friend Noah Knight joined the line. Now, this is what I remember. We walked from campus all the way downtown to the theater, bunches of us, there were a couple of hundred of us. Several students from Florida State, white students from Florida State University joined us. As we got about halfway downtown, there were police motorcycles and cars riding along us saying, "Stop, turn around, go back, you have no parade permit," and all this garbage. And we just kept right on walking, locked arms, singing "We Shall Overcome" and all our freedom stuff. When we got downtown in front of that theater, I don't know where all those white people came from. There were white people across the street. We lined up in front of the theater. The theater wall was to our backs, and the people across the street had bricks and cans and all bottles and all sorts of stuff. The police chief had his bullhorn going, giving us, I think he gave us 5 minutes to get up and leave, and some people did. My good friend who walked down with me, marched with me, he got up and left, but most of us stayed. I don't know if she wants her name involved in this, but my good friend, classmate, Betty Ferguson, Betty Tucker Ferguson was there. She was arrested with you ladies.
Right.
She later served as a county commissioner for Miami-Dade County.
Right.
But anyway, so then, as I recall, the police started with the water hose. And some of the people got all wet with the water. It was kind of chilly. Then they had the dogs. Somebody said to us, "Sit," because I remember we sat up against the wall and they had the water hose and all that stuff going with us. And then the police chief ordered the arrest. Now, we used to call them paddy wagons. I don't know what they call them today.
They call them vans.
Okay, but all of a sudden, out of no place,
That's right.
they must have been hiding around the corner someplace. All these paddy wagons started pulling up. And when the paddy wagons pulled up, the police officers were telling us, "Get up, get up." And we had been sitting there for a while saying we were not going to get up. Do you know what they did? They let those dogs.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they did not restrain those dogs. People actually got bitten by those doggone dogs because they let the dog make you get up. So anyway, they arrested us. I just happened to be, coincidentally, in the first paddy wagon to get to the jail. And I recall they pulled us up to the jail and then they backed in. And as they got us out and went through the little entrance thing there, the cells that they put us in, Tallahassee's healer, you know that. So you go into one level, but the cell that they put us in was like on the first floor. It was kind of built into a hill. Mm-hmm. And we went down in there, and like Delores just said, they packed us in like sardines. Mm-hmm. If you Google Tallahassee jail back then, there were 20-man cells. I think there were close to 300 of us. this is kind of comical. My paddy wagon was the first one, and we saw and heard something that the rest of you didn't see. They had a few stragglers in the jail. They actually let those people go. They shoot them out. Get up, go. We saw prisoners running from the jail. These people were so happy to get out of there, and they opened up those doggone doors, and they packed us in like sardines. At first, they had. You tell me if you recall this. They had ladies and men. Well, we were girls and boys back then, packed in the same cell. They just packed us in. The only separation that they made was they had white students there too, not from FSU. They put the white students in separate cells across the aisle from us. And guess what? They separated the white boys from the white girls. But they got all these black ladies and guys in the same cell. Later do you remember when the president of Florida State University came and got his students out? Later that evening, the white students all got released. That's when they took the ladies out of the cell with the guys and put them over in the cells where those whites were. Now, we were still standing shoulder to shoulder like this. Many of us were wet. Some people were bitten and all that stuff. Restroom? You think they let us out to use the restroom?
Oh, my goodness.
Excuse me, no such luck. We were there until the crack of dawn. And just around daybreak, the doors flew open, and they started opening the cell doors, telling the guys, get out. We thought we were going home. We went outside. They had buses out there. The correction buses with the bars up to the window. They had those buses out there. We thought that they were going to take us back to campus, like the white students had gone back to campus. They put us in those buses. Now, a main street runs right through the middle of Florida A&M's campus. I don't know why they took that particular route. They drove us straight through the campus. The buses did not stop to let us off. They kept us right to the outskirts of Tallahassee to what they call the fairgrounds. Overnight, while we were in the jail cells, the sheriff's department had workers to go out to the fairgrounds and put bars up to the windows of the big barn, the huge barn where they display during the county fair. They display the cows and the prize bulls and all that stuff. Huge building. But they put bars up to the few little windows that they had, not very many. And there were police officers stationed there. When the buses drove up, they had the shotguns on their shoulders like this, waiting for us.
And what was the purpose of that?
What do you mean?
Fairgrounds.
That's where they kept us.
Yeah, that was space large enough to accommodate
that was the only place that they could house.
And how long were you guys there?
We were there. Well, some people's parents came and bailed them out the first and second day. I was there for the long haul. I don't really recall exactly how many days. Probably something like 9, 10 days. We were well off in the barn. There were no accommodations for us at all. The first 2 nights we slept on the floors, and it was cold. No blankets, no cots, no anything. The churches organized and went. They told us to the Army base up in Georgia, and they got those cots like they do for the kindergartners, and the truck came in and put cots in there. They came back that afternoon with blankets and just threw them in there as if we were animals or something. You were talking about the food. Let me tell you what we did. The first morning when they put us in there, about 11 o'clock, they came with breakfast. Grits and eggs, no seasoning in the eggs, and the
powdered
grits,
eggs.
Yeah, powdered eggs, and the grits. They were in these garbage cans, big galvanized garbage cans. That's when. Now, the first 2 days, many of us, myself included, did not eat.
That's right.
We refused to eat jail food. That third day, that was the best food I ever had in my life. Mm-hmm. You get hungry enough, you eat it. Now, what they did, they gave us pepper, the little packs of pepper. And we learned to put pepper on our grits in order to season it. But here's one of the key things that we did, and this is significant. We had our student government president in there with us. And we were so organized. I mean, that that guy, I forget his name now, but he had us so organized. He said we would never let them see us act like animals. They would we didn't have toothbrushes, toothpaste, anything. 2 or 3 days they came in with the truck. They just opened the door and just threw the toothpaste and toothbrushes in there. Our student government president told us, don't anybody move. Don't let them see you scrambling for a toothbrush. Wait until the door is closed. And then he appointed a committee to go and distribute the toothbrush and toothpaste to everybody. When they gave us the blankets, nobody moved. We were cold. Don't go scrambling for a blanket. The committee passed out the blankets. What they didn't know is inside of that big barn structure, that was like an office area with like an 8-foot high wall. Maybe it wasn't quite 8 feet. But we discovered the second day that there was a phone line. Somebody saw a phone line going down the wall into that office. And the president, student government president, asked somebody to let him get up on their shoulder so he could look over there. Lo and behold, there was a phone in the office in there. They didn't know it. All the time that we were in there, we were in touch with the campus.
With the president.
Our student government president.
With the president?
Government president was in touch with the student government office on campus.
I was just correcting her.
Yeah. They were telling us what was happening. They were telling us that there was a follow-up march and other people got arrested. They were telling us that kind of stuff. They also told us that Dr. Gore told all of the instructors that our days of absence were to be counted as absences and would affect our grade point average and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so what eventually happened, we were there, 9, 10, 11 days or so. They opened the doors one day. Okay, you're going to trial. They took us to the auditorium. Tallahassee Civic Auditorium. They couldn't get all of us in the auditorium. They took us in shifts, like 3 or 4 different shifts. They told us, before the student government president found out that Martin Luther King was supposed to come and help represent us, but Martin Luther King was in Alabama with another problem, so he sent Ralph Abernathy. Ralph Abernathy got the lawyers together, and that's who represented the NAACP lawyers, and that's who represented us in court. And they called us in groups, big groups to fill up the whole theater. The judge told us the same thing.
Negroes.
He said, I find all of you guilty. And he ran off about 9 different charges. Parading without a permit, trampling personal property. They said that we stepped on people's flowers and lawns and all that kind of stuff. Disobeying the orders of a police officer. He named about 9 things.
Wow. And
he said, you're all guilty, but I'm going to withhold adjudication. But if you step foot off with Florida A&M property, especially if you set foot downtown, I'm going to throw the book at you. The evening after we got back to campus, Dr. Gore had a residence on campus. Most universities have a house with the president and his family, and he lived on campus. Our student body decided to hang him in effigy. It was still cold. We went out on the lawn of Dr. Gore's house. He and Pearl, his wife's name was Pearl, and we kept calling her, Dr. Gore, Pearl, come outside. We called her Pearl. That was being disrespectful, of course. We want to see you and Pearl. They would not come out. They sent the campus police out to threaten to arrest us, and if we didn't obey the campus police, we used to call them Boy Scouts. If we didn't adhere to their orders, they were going to call the county police and have us arrested. But the student body had made, what do you call it, like a dummy, a doll, a big mannequin-like thing of Dr. Gore. And of course, his backyard had trees and we hung him in effigy. Some people set little fires on the lawn. When I say little fire, we didn't try to burn the place down.
Now,
it was cold.
Mad at him?
Heck yeah!
Good reason to be angry with him.
Were we mad? Of course.
He did not defend his students. He fired some of the professors who were involved. Had the students' academic records challenged.
Yeah. First president came down and got his students not to go and left us in there.
So they had good reason.
Got it. So as we wrap up this topic, can you give us a brief comment on how these sit-ins paved the way for civil rights for us today, for young people?
Certainly, our demonstrations brought the attention to not only America, but to the world, and put that pressure on. But what I think more significant for us as young people, that we were a new generation starting out saying we were not going to take it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we were being educated, and therefore I think it opened doors for us. And unfortunately, from the way I look at it, we did not teach our children what struggles we've had. So I don't think, as I discussed with Delores, that they don't have the foggiest idea of what we went through. Mm-hmm. And therefore there's no appreciation. But for us, as individuals, as the ones that came the generation that was moving on, I think it opened a lot of doors for us and had a lot of fighting. And of course, for me personally, it opened me up to respecting what my father had to go through and my mother in order to provide a living for us, which I had no knowledge of until then.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Delores, your comment? Brief comment?
Well, I feel the same way.
Okay.
We went through something that gave us value. And we then began to see what had happened in the past and appreciated what our parents went through with. And unfortunately, a couple of generations has passed since we went through these things, and we have not passed that on to our children. And they have a false sense of security. They think they're free. In the middle school, when I was a guidance counselor, I would ask them about it. And you think you're free because you've been able to go to school with people of other persuasions, that you can go to a hotel or you can get a meal from someplace, that maybe I couldn't or your grandfather couldn't.
Got it.
But what about the opportunities? They're not there anymore for you. Dr. Dunn was one of the first down at FIU. Now, I always said, they seem to be a generation of listeners. They're not researchers. Mm-hmm. So if the television says, if somebody says something on the radio or the television, they'll allude to that. Well, they said this. They say, but how do you know? Did you research that? What have you done? So we're listeners and not doing anything about what we're hearing. We're the believers.
Well, that's the reason for this podcast. That's one of the very reasons for this podcast. Take us out, Dr. Raymond. How did those sit-ins help pave the way for us today?
Well, I don't know how to help pave the way for us. I could tell you how it changed me.
Yeah.
Because I was a young 19-year-old guy, okay? And this is my first experience with this kind of thing. But I think because this is the part about paving the way for young people. Young people need to understand that they need to get involved. I was never involved in anything like that up to that point. But look at what it did for me. When I left Florida A&M University, because of that experience of getting involved, I just jotted down while you were asking her that question, some of the things that I became involved in after I graduated. I came and I served on several boards and committees for the Community Action Agency.
Okay.
I was the president of the organization that started child care programs in Miami-Dade County. I was the president of the North Dade Improvement Association.
Okay.
Through that, we fought to get streetlights in Bunch Park, sidewalks in Opelika. We stopped the Border Patrol from building a prison in what is now Miami Gardens. We did all sorts of things. I was a member of UPPAC, another community organization that Betty Ferguson was involved in. I just don't know that I would have become that much involved in the community and trying to help if I had not, as a young person at Florida, and got involved at that level.
Wow. Well, this, as you guys can see, was an exciting topic. I mean, we could be here for hours just talking about this. I want to thank you, Carolyn Reed, for joining us on the phone.
Thanks, Carol.
Ms. Delores Hills for sitting in.
Thank you, buddy.
And this concludes topic 2. Well, you know, guys, I'm still like reeling from the last topic we just got.
It was incredible. I've done a lot of Black History programs, but listening to those three people talk about what happened in Tallahassee should be put into a time capsule.
It really should. Are you going to write a book about this?
I'll leave that up to Marvin.
You're going to leave it up to Marvin? That's your experience.
I've already done that.
You already done it. It's time to share your story. Well, now
We'll share it together.
We'll share it together. Okay, I like that. So let's segue now into the civil rights movement in St. Augustine. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about the Black veterans' impact of then.
Well, speaking of Black veterans in general and their impact on the civil rights movement, one reason why the civil rights movement, the so-called modern civil rights movement, began in the 1940s and early 50s is because Black veterans were coming back from the Second World War, from Europe in particular, from Japan, where they had fought Hitler, where they had fought Tojo, and where many of them had died. So a lot of these guys and women, Black folks, came back from the war with the feeling that they were not going to take it anymore. They were not going to simply empowered. They had experienced things in Europe that had been totally new to them in terms of race relations. So the impetus for the civil rights movement in the 1940s and into the 1950s was Black veterans in particular, who really just moved things along a lot faster than would have happened had it not been for their experiences overseas. So this applied both in Tallahassee, in Florida. All the southern states had, I think, very active veterans involved in the movement.
You have anything to add to that?
Well, just bear in mind now that you go off to war, you go through the military, you learn how to shoot. Mm-hmm. Hello?
That was a problem. He's right. World War I, a lot of Black veterans coming back to Rosewood. What happened in Rosewood? It was Black veterans.
Exactly.
Who had been taught to shoot, and white folks were afraid of these men because they knew how to use weapons.
Exactly.
Same thing with the guys coming back World War II.
See, slave masters didn't have to worry about that too much because they never taught the niggers how to shoot. Mm-hmm.
So another problem with this was, since this is unfiltered, a lot of these Black guys came back from Germany, Italy, talking about their experiences with white women.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
And some of the brothers, being as we are, would tend to embellish a little bit their stories about how many this and all that. And the white folks listening to this, a lot of people were upset about this. So the sense that we have got to take control of these veterans coming back in with the idea that they can have access to white women. You had Black veterans who were bringing over their wives or their girlfriends and their children into these southern communities. So the interracial sexual aspect was also a part of what was going on. And in many communities, including in DeLand, where we grew up, if you were a Black soldier, a Black sailor coming back from the war, when you got home, you had to take that uniform off. You would not wear that uniform downtown. White folks would be upset that you still thought you had certain privileges and rights that you had.
Fought for the country.
Did make a damn bit of difference. You took that uniform off.
Brother, help me out with this because you actually lived it. But one of the things that I was impressed with early on was when those of you who were in uniform during your day, James, Bill's day.
Our brothers.
When you traveled, and I learned this from James, I think I did. When you traveled and you were in uniform, you got respect for that. You would, if you needed to get back to base, back in those days, if there were few or no seats, I wouldn't get on. But if you had your uniform on, they respected that, and somehow you got on.
Well, that cut both ways. Being an officer made a difference if you were traveling in the public. You tended to get a little bit more deferential treatment, even from Southern whites in uniform. On the other hand, there were some white people who didn't like that, who would actually speak to me directly, saying, "You're an officer?" With this sense of, I must be faking it. The uniform must not be real. But I must say, in terms of being in public, in the uniform of a naval officer, brought respect from most people in uniform and out. And there were very few instances in which I was disrespected.
I remember one, but you don't want me to tell that long story right now. I love telling that story.
So we're going to get to
Right.
how the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement, went from Miami to Tallahassee, and now it's in St. Augustine.
Mm-hmm. Yes, St. Augustine, 1964. Tallahassee was first. Of course, the movement sprung up in other places too. North Carolina, the students, in other places around the country. But Tallahassee was a special case. It was the only city in Florida where Dr. King came to become actively involved.
Not Tallahassee. You said Tallahassee.
I meant St. Augustine.
St. Augustine.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. St. Augustine, yes. St. Augustine had a black dentist there, Dr. Halings.
Veteran.
Dr. Robert Haley?
That's correct. He was the leader of the civil rights movement in St. Augustine. Now, we didn't mention, when we were talking about Tallahassee, we didn't mention C.K. Steele, Reverend C.K. Steele.
You know, I really felt guilty about that because we talked about in the 60s. He was back in 1956.
That's correct.
C.K. Steele.
Yeah, before we get to St. Augustine, just out of respect for C.K.
Right.
Okay,
Steele.
let's backtrack a little
He
bit.
was called the Little Giant. He was a little man. He was a preacher of a big church in Tallahassee. And folks said that he could out-preach King on any given Sunday morning.
I never heard that.
Oh, yes. They said
Okay.
when C.K. Steele laid into the sermon, you had to sit back and pay attention. And he was the one that Patricia Stevens Dew, that we were talking about earlier, and the other student leaders would meet at his house or at his church. A lot of the movement particulars were planned at his church or at his house. And at one point, the Klan burned a cross in his yard, photographs of it. So we need to give due diligence to what he did.
Yeah, let's just mention one of the things that he was successful in working on was a bus boycott.
That's right.
In 1956 in Tallahassee. And it wasn't, what happened was two female college students sat down next to a white woman on a bus, and they were arrested. And the charge was that they were a threat to incite a riot. And Reverend Steele cut into that, and he took charge of that. And not only did they integrate seating, but he also wanted fair employment in the transit system. And
Yes.
so anyway,
They organized a carpool in Tallahassee.
they did.
So a lot of black folks needed to use the bus to get to work.
It lasted for 7 months.
Right. And for 7 months, people would volunteer their cars to be used to drive other black folks to work and back and forth. So it was a very well-organized movement in the 50s in Tallahassee, and C.K. Steele.
Let's be honest. There were some whites who drove some blacks also, believe it or not,
That's true.
to work
Very true.
during that demonstration. During that.
So back to Dr. Robert Haley.
He was a dentist, former, not former, but a veteran, who was one of those people who said, well, enough is enough. And people started coalescing around Dr. Halings.
May I ask you a question? Is he the one who said, "I'll shoot and ask questions later"?
I don't know.
I think he was because he was fed up.
He was
might have
fed
been.
I
up?
think he was. I read that in your book, by the way. So
He must have said it.
I'll find it for you.
But as the movement was growing around the country, things in St. Augustine were also developing, and Halings was the center of activity in St. Augustine. He was leading a boycott of the lunch counter type of sit-ins, and getting a lot of white resistance. And he invited Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to come to St. Augustine. King wouldn't come. It was out of the way. It was not part of the plan. But once there was a major incident in St. Augustine that attracted national attention, King would follow the cameras now. He realized the importance of the media in making the movement meaningful outside of these local places where these things were occurring. So King decides to come to St. Augustine, and he starts to organize children to demonstrate. He saw the benefit of having children be the object of police harassment, of being arrested by the police, that would attract attention of white folks saying, well, they're putting in little black kids in jail and what have you. So he had kids, elementary school age kids, with the little placards marching in St. Augustine, getting arrested.
Maybe you should play that for our current president. Hint, hint.
Well, that's another story. Don't get me
right.
started on the Orange Man. I'd be off track here. And there were cases where kids high school kids and even younger, would walk up to the police and ask to be arrested. They would ask to be taken into custody because they wanted to be a part of this movement. So King comes in and he decides to, they're going to integrate the Monson Motor Lodge. The Monson Motor Lodge actually is under a different name, still exists. I was there a year or so ago staying overnight for a conference. I'll get to that at the end of the story. The manager of the Monson Motor Lodge was a man named James Brock, a white man named James Brock. And King goes there with a bunch of demonstrators to integrate the pool. They couldn't check into the hotel, but they decided to get in the swimming pool. And the first thing that Brock did with these black folks in the swimming pool was that was a picture of him in my book, pouring acid.
Muric acid.
Walk around the edge of the pool, pouring acid into the water to force these people out. And they didn't get out.
Yeah.
Now, King was not one of the ones in the pool. He was there, and Abernathy and the rest of them, he was not one of the ones in the pool. They come back the next day, back in the pool, and puts an alligator into the swimming pool.
Yes, he did.
And they still didn't get out. It took the St. Augustine police to wade in and take these people out of that swimming pool individually into jail. And that's how King got arrested. So that photograph that became so famous of Dr. King in the back seat of the police car with the dog looking right at him, that was in St. Augustine. Eventually, King left. Let me stay with this just for a second. When Dr. King was in St. Augustine, they had to take him to a different house every night to sleep because he was being watched and his life was being threatened. When the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 was signed into law, King was in St. Augustine. He held a press conference in St. Augustine to celebrate the fact that this law had been passed. So he was in a very visible position at the time that this law was passed in St. Augustine, which made him even more of a target. He was lucky to have gotten out of St. Augustine alive. When he did leave St. Augustine, King said it was the most racist place that he'd ever been, and he left St. Augustine and went to Selma and became involved in the movement in Selma. So that's kind of one other thing about the St. Augustine movement. Dr. Halings was a part of this. And this is what got King to go to St. Augustine. The mother of the governor of Massachusetts was arrested, along a white woman, obviously. Peabody, what was the first name?
Was it Margaret?
Miss Malcolm.
Malcolm
Peabody,
Peabody
yeah.
was a brother of the governor of Massachusetts who was demonstrating with Dr. Halings and these other black folks, and she got arrested. And this made national news.
This woman was 72 years old at the time, and they arrested her.
So the photograph of Dr. Halings leaving the jail with Mrs. Peabody made news all over the country. And when King saw that,
May I share another part of that story? Dr. Halings, to call attention to what was happening in St. Augustine, encouraged college students from up north to come to St. Augustine during spring break, not to swim and drink and have fun, but to actually help in the civil rights movement. And those students came down. And that, too, helped to move that effort forward. And Marvin helped me out here now, but what happened with the minister? He asked Minister Israel, I'm calling him a minister, he was a rabbi, right?
There was a group of them.
Yeah, he was a rabbi to help out. Rabbi Israel pulled together the largest group of rabbis in the history of this country up to that time to come and participate in a sit-in demonstration and they were arrested.
That's correct. At the Monsamoto line.
Yeah, at
in
the
parking
Monsamoto,
lot.
right.
They were in the parking lot.
Can you believe that they arrested a group of rabbis, and that made national news?
It did, and it certainly did. I'm glad you mentioned that. It also attracted other ministers, Christian ministers, to the St. Augustine movement. And there's a very widely distributed photograph of several of these clergymen and rabbis who had been arrested during the movement in St. Augustine. And the importance of that image was that it showed the country that the civil rights movement was not just black people, not just black ministers, but now you were attracting Jewish leaders and Christian leaders who were white and of various denominations into the movement. It was a very powerful photograph.
How is the city viewed today?
St. Augustine?
Through Black Eyes Unfiltered.
Well, you know, we were talking before we started filming about St. Augustine. Black people came to St. Augustine in 1513, but the Spanish, when the city was established. St. Augustine had a very vibrant, free black community in St. Augustine in the 15 and 1600s. We even spoke about some Haitians who had participated in the Haitian Revolution between 1791 and 1804 when Haiti became established. And some of these Haitians had fought on the side of the Spanish, trying to free Santo Domingo and what have you. So you had Haitians moving into St. Augustine in the early 1800s. George Biasso, we were talking about him just a moment ago, was one of the Haitian leaders in St. Augustine, who proudly wore his uniform from the Haitian Revolution up and down the streets of St. Augustine, making a lot of white folks mad.
They're still doing that today, by the way. They still represent their history like that. And maybe what we should mention, in case some of our audience may not recognize, that St. Augustine is the oldest city in Florida, right?
Oldest city in the country.
So, I mean, you go back to 1500s. St. Augustine was a key player in the development of this country.
Yeah, well, that was a Spanish settlement actually in what became Tampa before St. Augustine, but it didn't last. The folks died out or moved out or were killed by the Indians. And then St. Augustine was the first established city in what's now the United States of America that was established with a very significant number of black people, both free and enslaved in St. Augustine. In fact, Fort Mose.
Oh, I went there.
It was built right out 2 miles outside of St. Augustine. This is going beyond your question, but
That's okay.
when the Spanish settled in Florida, their rules in terms of slaves was different. They were more liberal. You could buy your way out of slavery. There were they had legal protections from a cruel master in the Spanish slavery. If you agreed to become a Catholic, you could not be enslaved. So once Georgia and South Carolina got established with all these slaves, a lot of folks started running into Spanish Florida, would learn their catechism, become Catholic, and they would be free. So this was a problem. What Spain did was they established a little town outside of the city of St. Augustine called Fort Mose, which was the first free black community in the United States, and was set up as a buffer between Georgia and the city of St. Augustine, so that they knew sooner or later the Americans were going to come and try to take St. Augustine. They'd have to go through Fort Mose before they got to St. Augustine. And the blacks from Fort Mose would then move into that big fort that they have there. I forgot the name of it for the moment, and would then be protected from the onslaught of whites coming down from Georgia to try to take St. Augustine.
And I think that's a beautiful segue to what's coming up, because this is our last episode for season 1 of Through Black Eyes Unfiltered. And I think we've gone from talking about you guys, learning a little bit of background, talking about Rosewood, talking about the Miami riots of 1980. We're concluding with the civil rights movement. Why did you guys choose, as we begin to wrap up, to end our first season with the civil rights movement in Florida?
Oh, I can answer that quickly.
Go ahead.
Because so much of what we've talked about is ugly, violent, regrettable, sad. So it makes sense to end on a positive note, to show from where we've come to where we are. And had it not been for this movement, to just imagine how much worse off we would be. So it's coming through, it's a journey.
It is.
Journey through a lot of misery to a place of hope. And that's why I think we end on this segment.
And let's remember that the civil rights movement, although targeted and looked upon by the country as a movement for blacks, inspired other things that other people benefited from, like women. Women got some advantages because of the efforts of civil rights, because of changes in laws. And a lot of things changed because of the civil rights movement, not just in the interest of black people.
I think there was
Just to add one other point, though. The civil rights movement had its limitations, as King realized near the end of his life, that just because you get the right to attend a white school or to live in a certain neighborhood didn't mean that the impact of racism and poverty and institutional racism was ended. So even though the civil rights movement is a positive place to begin the next discussion and to end the previous discussion, we should not think that that movement was an end in itself. It was the beginning of a new path for the whole country to come together to move forward.
And would that go back to healing that we were talking about earlier as a possible way to move forward?
Right.
Very precise.
And the civil rights movement is a part of that healing?
That's
and
correct.
It still is today for my generation and the generations after me?
That's
Even though they
correct.
got to do a little bit more working. Hopefully the generations watching this will get that if they don't get nothing else. Gotta work for it.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marvin Dunn. Thank you so much, Dr. Raymond Dunn, Sr.
And thank you.
This concludes the first season of Through Black Eyes Unfiltered.